My name is Amanda, and today we have the Honorable Minister of Agriculture from Guyana, South America, Dr. Leslie Ramsammy. Thank you for being on my show today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Tell me a little bit about the agriculture in Guyana.
Agriculture for Guyana is very, very important. Without agriculture, Guyana does not have a hope of developing any further. Indeed, agriculture, its history in Guyana, is linked to the development of our people. First, the country was developed as an agriculture country. So slaves and indentured laborers came to Guyana to develop agriculture. It is agriculture that has allowed Guyana to go from a least developing, poor, bankrupt country after independence to today being a middle income country. And it is agriculture that will propel Guyana from being a middle income country to a high middle income and eventually to a developed country status. Our ambition in Guyana is to be a high middle income country by 2020. And without agriculture, that will not happen because Guyana is one of the few countries, developing countries in the world, that actually could feed her people. And because we have the potential to produce more than we need, for example, we only need 15,000 tons of rice to feed our people, but we produce 400,000 tons. So because we can produce to feed our people, we don't have to import any food. We do, but we don't have to. And we have excess that we can export to other countries. It's that export potential that will make Guyana wealthy. So agriculture in Guyana is very important. And I know that you people would want to know, and all our Guyanese sisters and brothers know, that rice and sugar is very important. But a lot of people in Miami today, or those who visit Barbados and Antigua and Jamaica, the squash, the butternut squash that they eat, the sweet pepper and so that they eat are now coming from Guyana, so that we have the potential to feed our people and feed other people around the world.
So you mentioned rice and sweet pepper, your butternut squash. So what other things do you export from Guyana?
Well, sugar, of course, and sugar is very important. People ought to know that we produce one of the best sugars in the world. We genuinely have gold and crystal sugar. But besides that, we also, in terms of agriculture, export other things. We have some of the best wood in the world, and we export a lot of that. But if you go downtown Manhattan and you get the large prawns, chances are that it came from Guyana. So we export a lot of fish, we export a lot of wood. In addition to that, we now are self-sufficient in poultry, in table eggs, in chicken meat, and we could export some of these to the Caribbean countries. But we are now developing the capacity for beef, for pork, and so on. But a country as it was when your mother and others that are listening to us were growing up in Guyana, even if they had enough beef, could not have exported it, because you need to have certain infrastructure like an abattoir, because to bring meat into America or to Europe, it has to come with a certain quality and certain condition. And so as a country, there was an era when I was a child and so on, where we only focus on getting the product. We didn't really care about the quality and how we package it. And this is where Guyana is going now. we have packaging so that we could export. Any country that produces for itself, and you have to produce for yourself, will never really escape poverty and become wealthy. America is rich not only because it produces for its people, but it could export. Japan, without much natural resources, has become rich. Singapore has become rich because they can export. India, for many, many decades after independence, was a really, really poor country because it never was able to produce for itself, much less exporting. But India is growing phenomenally today because it can export. So the secret of developing a country is to make sure you could develop for your own people, but develop in such a way that you could also export. Without an export capacity, you are going to be in that stagnant place, not really growing out of your poverty. Guyana is able to do that. We can export, and that is what is the big secret and the big reason for propelling ourselves further, in that we have the land, we have the know-how that we can produce to export, and that export capacity is going to make us wealthy.
Okay. So you mentioned Japan's wealth as well as America's. So tell us the secret to Guyana's economy and how does agriculture help it?
As I stated before, it has to be not only producing for ourselves, but being able to export. And we have to also focus on transforming what we send to other countries and not send raw material. Because most countries, that's what they do. When they have excess, they send raw material. We have to have value added. So the secret is not sending bulk sugar, but to package the sugar because you get more money. And not to send bulk rice, but to package the rice. And in the old colonial days, the developed countries tried to get you to send them bulk products. Now that we are independent and promoting better and higher economic development, we have to ensure that we build an infrastructure so that we don't want to send the bulk rice or bulk sugar. And I'm sure that people in this country have used the packaged Guyanese sugar. Well, that has a higher value. Same thing with our rice. When I was growing up, and your mother and other people who probably are listening to us were growing up in Guyana, they went and they bought rice and sugar with their own container. And now they go and they buy these nice 5-pound package sugar or 1 gallon rice, that type of thing, in nice package. So that's what we have to focus on, packaging our stuff, processing our stuff, and sending it out, creating not just menial jobs, but also high-tech jobs, such as in factories, etc.
So in President Ramatar's recent visit to New York, he also mentioned there was a 40% loss in profit because of sugar. What do you think about that?
Well, this is a very important thing, and I'm glad you asked that question, because in recent times people have been talking about sugar failing in Guyana and there is no future for Guyana, and all of that are myths, because in fact sugar is still very important to Guyana. Sugar by itself accounts for 10% of our economy. And imagine that President Bush before and President Obama now try to bail out the banks because they said that the banks represent a significant part of the US economy. But the banks only, the financial sector in America, only account for about 2.5 to 3% of your economy. But they felt that it's too big to allow it to fail. That's why they had to bail them out. Now think about sugar, which is 10% of our economy. So it is too big to fail, because if sugar fails, Guyana fails, and we can't allow that. However, in 2010, the Europeans arbitrarily, without giving us much notice, reduced the price they were paying us for our sugar by about 36%. So we lost 42 million US dollars in 1 year. Now, for a small country, that's a huge loss, and that would threaten you with failure. But Guyana was able to overcome that. But the reduction was even worse than the price cut, because at the same time as they cut the price for sugar, the euro, because we are being paid in euro, lost its value against the US dollar. So the actual reduction was more like 40 to 50%. And yet Guyana is able to overcome these difficulties. The future for Guyana is not only to produce more sugar, but to remove from the status where we are a bulk sugar exporter to sending out the packaged and processed sugar. Now, right now, countries don't want us to do that because they want our sugar, because our sugar is a premium product for countries like America and Europe in their processing plant. You know, they convert it to white sugar because we have almost pure sugar, and they don't like to hear us talk about doing the processing ourselves. But for the future, that's what we have to do. And of course, sugar is threatened by something else, as is rice and all the other agricultural products, and that's climate change. Because agriculture is a climate-sensitive activity. And for Guyana, this, and not just Guyana, but the whole of the Caribbean and many of the developing countries, because agriculture is so important, that climate change is creating havoc. Too much rain, flooding out the land, and so on. And this is now interspersed by periods of drought sometimes that cause major problems in many Asian countries, many African countries, and so on. And Guyana is dealing with this right now.
Okay, so I went to a meeting in Guyana recently, and the speaker was talking about the farmers, and I know the farmers had a lot of things to say. So how does the farmers take action in this agricultural part?
Well, for one, when we were all growing up, farming was a subsistence activity. See, because we all went to Guyana as either slaves or indentured laborers, farming was for two purposes. One, for the colonial masters to get enough product that they want for their own country, and secondly, so that people could have some food for their own livelihood. So it was subsistence living. But now that we have aspirations to be a highly middle-income country, and we would also like to be a developed country one day, and we want to make agriculture entrepreneurial so that people are doing businesses, developing factories, etc. We are no longer developing agriculture as subsistence. So giving land tenure for agriculture, where a person have a small plot of land to do a little kitchen garden, cannot support the agriculture we're talking about. We're talking about people getting access to large expanse of land. We're talking about developing things like aquaculture, because we have depended on marine fish for export. But we want to now develop aquaculture on our land. At the same time, most Guyanese living here in America, and many Americans know that Guyana is one of those countries that is leading the climate change advocacy. And in fact, we have something called a low carbon development strategy, a LCDS. And what that is that because they because of the industrial activity, you develop too much carbon dioxide that goes into the air and at the expense of oxygen. But plants, forests, and so produce oxygen as opposed to what human beings and the industries do. And so because Guyana is still a pristine country with lots of forests, lots of greenery, we have an excess in terms of carbon credits. We don't produce as much carbon in the air and therefore poison the air like some of the developed countries do. And for that reason, that becomes now a very important agricultural product, so that instead of selling our forest, we can now sell our carbon credits. And countries, so like Norway in the last 2 years, have paid us 70 million US dollars for our carbon credit. And this year, we expect another $40 million. So that selling countries like America and so our carbon credit could give us a lot of money. And this is where the farmers have more opportunity by growing more for export, by taking advantage of the carbon credit market that is present now globally. Farmers are now entrepreneurs and businessmen. And so instead of being a peasant farmer, just simply putting 2 potato or 2 pounds of rice on the table, you're actually producing tons of rice and so for export. For that, we have to develop the roads and the market. We have developed refrigerated facilities, etc., to help the farmers.
I know that Brazil is right like neighbors with Guyana, so I know they have a rising economy. How does that take role on Guyana?
Well, we are happy that Brazil is becoming one of the most important, one of the largest economy around the world. In many ways, that helps us. One, Brazil has 200 million people, and it's next to us. So it's a huge market. But Brazil has technology also that we can use. There are about 40 million people that live in the side of Brazil near to Guyana that are cut off by a mountain range. Their only window to the world is our ports. And so building a road to Guyana will allow them to export their product. But in so doing, they give us access to 40 million people. But there is another important thing that Brazil has done. Brazil has used things like soya, etc., to develop a strong biofuel industry. And this is where Guyana has another opportunity, the farmers in Guyana and the country, because we can now grow sugarcane, not just for the production of sugar, but we can now grow sugarcane and convert it into bioethanol, the alternative energy stream. And that's what Guyana is now doing. We are talking to our farmers, we're talking to investors abroad to come and use the huge expanse of land that we have. And that adds another product. And not only could we use it to reduce our imports of oil, because that's a large expense for us, but we could export our ethanol and have premium profits from. And that's how we help our farmers and our people, by exploring new things.
Okay, so we've mentioned a whole bunch about agriculture. So tell me, what is your job?
Well, my job is to see. I left this country to go back to Guyana because I've always been a dreamer, and I have no apologies for that because I grew up in Guyana, like your mother and like others, where we were really poor people. Most of our parents were peasants and so on. But by working hard, we made ourselves better, and many of us are doing well in countries like America and so on. But I'm a dreamer, and I refuse to think that Guyana will always be poor. And in fact, I want to think, and more than think, I want to make sure that Guyana in my lifetime is a high income, middle income country. I want to make sure that we are the breadbasket of the Caribbean. I want to make sure that when people come to America from Guyana to live in America, they're not coming because they're seeking the better life, because there is already a good life in Guyana. I want to make sure that your mother's children and the children whose parents are from Guyana would see Guyana as a country that they want to go to. And that's why what I'm doing is, and people will recall this, that when we were doing farming in Guyana, we wanted our children to be doctors and lawyers and engineers because farming has always been looked upon as a peasant activity. And I want to make sure that farming becomes an entrepreneurial activity so that our children, just like they want to be doctors and nurses, would also want to be farmers. And so that's my dream for Guyana, that we live in a free country, that we live in a country where every citizen has an equitable opportunity of making a decent and a good living. And I want a country where we can, when our children are born, that they can dream and dream big. And I believe that we have a country with natural resources to make that happen. I believe we have a country of hard-working people, and I believe we have the collective wisdom to make our dreams come true.
So you were the 61st president of the WHO, World Health Organization, of 2008 and 2009. So what did you do in order to help Guyana?
That was, for me, an honor, and it's a privilege to have served as the president of the World Health Organization in 2008 and 2009. And people would recall that that was the year when we had the avian flu scare, the bird flu scare around the world. And in fact, the WHO had to ensure that we protect the world, and I was the president of it then. In addition to that, there is something called a 75 by 25 advocacy, and that was one of my thing at the World Health Organization. And what it says is that we should work together as a world to make sure that no country has a life expectancy below 75 by 2025, and that by 2025 that all preventable child death and maternal death should be avoided. That was the year we also started the tobacco revolution. And I know that Mayor Bloomberg of New York is one of the very important figures because he has a foundation. We recognize that tobacco was destroying the lives of people around the world. And so Guyana was one of the leaders to ensure that we have a global agreement in controlling tobacco and in putting laws and so in place. It was also the time in 2008 when we made the world recognize that it is not just AIDS killing people, but in fact the chronic non-communicable diseases were killing people in India, in South Africa, in Tanzania, etc., in America, in Guyana, things like diabetes, hypertension, and so these chronic non-communicable diseases. But nobody was paying attention to it. And in 2008, we forced the world to pay attention. It's my proudest moment because, in fact, in early last year, for the first time, the United Nations came together in New York to recognize the danger of the chronic non-communicable diseases. It was only the second time in history that world leaders came together to discuss a health issue. First time, I participated in 2001 with AIDS. And in 2008, when I was president of the World Health Organization, we started on this journey that led to the first summit of world leaders to discuss the chronic non-communicable diseases, to put into the forefront diabetes and hypertension and cancer and obesity and so on the development agenda. Very proud of these work. And in fact, Guyana should be proud, and all of us should be proud. Because of that, the world is now better. We will make sure that people could live longer. And lastly, let me just say this, that I don't believe that when a child is born in New York or in Georgetown or in Windsor Forest or in Tushen or in Kigali in Rwanda or something, that any of those child should be at a disadvantage. Because right now, if you're born in New York, right out in one of these homes here, that child has the potential to live to be up to 80 years old. But if a child is born in Kigali, in Rwanda, or in Port-au-Prince, in Haiti, that child only has a chance of living to be 40 years old. And I believe this is global inequity that we have to address. At the WHO in 2008, we placed that on the global development agenda, that those are responsibilities of all of us together as a world and not just at the national level. So I think that this is what I would like to see every young child, every young professional, every world leader address.
Don't forget, my name is Amanda, and tune in next time, same place.